All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to start onto our next application. And here's the end product. We're going to have a home page with 3 buttons. And if I click on one of the pages, it's going to go to a new page. If I hit the back button, and go to another page, hit back, go to another page, and load a web page. Now this one will load a web page as well. And we'll talk about loading a web page in a moment. But what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to create a multi-page app that'll transition and have different styles of transitions here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by creating a new project. It'll be a single view application, making sure that we have iOS and application and single view application highlighted. We're going to hit next and give it a name. I'm going to call it My Game. And language is Objective-C, device is universal, and we'll uncheck all 3, so core data, unit tests, and UI tests. And we'll hit next. And give it a home. Okay, and then we'll hit create after we found a home for it. And we'll notice, first I'm going to change my simulator to iPhone 5, because I tend to forget. And let me resize my screen down so it fits here. All right. So we'll notice that we have our home page here, My Game. And we're going to do a landscape app. So I'm going to uncheck portrait here. I don't want it in portrait mode at all. And for the settings, that'll be good enough. But let's look back at our files here. And let's organize our files. That'll be our first step here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create different groups. So if I right click on My Game, I'm going to say New Group. And I'm going to call this one Special Classes. Right click on My Game again, New Group, and I'll call this View Controllers. Again on My Game, New Group, call this one Images. And I'll right click on My Game again, New Group, and call this one Nibs. So I have a bunch of groups. Now the idea is to move our files into the proper groups. So we'll start by moving appdelegate.h&m into Special Classes. We'll move View Controller H&m to View Controllers. Main Storyboard and Launch Screen into Nibs. And so now if I expand Special Classes, I expand View Controller, expand Images, and expand Nibs, I have all my files here. Okay. Now, we downloaded these images that we're going to put into our app. And the way we import the images into the project is important. And it's important because the idea is that if we ever move a project to another computer, then at least that entire project, including the image files, get moved to that other computer. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on images, and we're going to add the image files that we have downloaded. So we're going to say add files to My Game. And when this comes up, we want to navigate to where our images are downloaded. So I'm going to do that right now. And I have this folder called Images. Underneath it, I have a few files. So this is where my files are. You may want to navigate to your Downloads folder and find it there. So I'm going to select my images. I'm going to hold down Command and select more than one file. Now before I hit Add, we have to do one really important thing. And that is copy items if needed must be checked. Absolutely must be checked. In fact, they should just make it by default. Just do this thing, because This checkbox will allow us to make a copy of that image and put it inside our project folder. Really important that we do this. So we're going to say copy items if needed, and then we'll hit add. And so all our images will appear here under our images folder. But if I right click on any one of them and I go show in Finder, it will show me that it's in the same location as my code. Now maybe you want to organize your code even further by having folders and folders for images, folders for view controllers, all those different things, and you can go ahead and do that at a later point. But for now we'll just leave everything in the same folder. But at least we know that the files are in the same location as my code, so if I was to ever zip up this project and put it on another computer, then it'll be there. Right? It'll all be together and I won't have any missing files. That's the idea. So it's you gotta be very careful when you're doing things like this. All right, so I have my images here, and what I want to do is I want to start configuring the project and adding everything I need to add. So far I've added in the images, but this app that we're going to have is a multi-page app. By default, if I look at main storyboard, there's only one screen. There's only one screen here in the storyboard, and that's it. And in my project, there's only one view controller object, but I have 4 pages in total. So I have to have the capability for 4 pages in total. Right now I only have 1. So the first step I'm going to do is notice that every screen has a support object of type view controller or UI view controller. So what I want to do is I want to bring in a few more view controller objects into this project. I want to create them. So I'm going to right click on view controllers. I'm going to say new file. And under iOS and source, I have the option for Objective-C file and header file, but those will just generate those files individually. I want to generate a class. So if I look at Cocoa Touch class, I can generate an actual H&M file at the same time. So if I say Cocoa Touch class and I hit next, now check the subclass type. You may start off with NS object, but you want to switch it over to UI view controller. So because we're dealing with view controllers here, and we're dealing with a view on the screen, we want to have our objects be a subclass of UI view controller. And when we do that, we end up with trying to auto-generate a name called view controller. And so we can, and because we already have view controller already generated, we should change that name. So I'm going to call this one game view controller. And don't worry if you didn't get it the first time, I'm going to do it 2 more times for the other 2 objects. So we'll do a subclass of UI view controller. I'm going to call this one game view controller. I won't check off generate XIB file because we're dealing with storyboard, so we'll do this inside the storyboard. And our language is Objective-C. We'll hit next, and we'll give it a home. So where it's located right now is perfectly fine. If you want to organize your view controllers into a separate folder, you can go ahead and do that by saying new folder. But I'm going to say create. And so it has generated a game view controller.h and a game view controller.m. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this 2 more times for 2 more views. So I'm going to right click on view controller and say new file. iOS source Cocoa Touch class. Hit next. Subclass of UI view controller. I'm going to call this one settings view controller. Settings view controller. Language is Objective-C. I'll hit next. And give it a home. So same home as before is fine. Okay, so now I have settings view controller.h and settings view controller.m. I'll right click on view controllers, new file, Cocoa Touch class, next, UI view controller, and I call this one about view controller. Hit next and give it a home and create. So at this point, I have all the files I need to work with in this particular app. So I have different view controller objects, I have my image files. The next step is to go on to the storyboard and start configuring stuff. So I'm going to switch over to main storyboard, but before I do that, let's look at the launch screen. This is our chance to configure the launch screen first and then go into the main storyboard. And remember, big difference between launch screen.storyboard and main.storyboard. Launch screen again is just our splash page. So we're only ever going to have one view on this. It'll appear there for 2 seconds and then disappear and go to the home page of main storyboard. That's the whole purpose. So make sure that you're not mixing the two up. We're going to start with launch screen.storyboard and we're going to set it up so that we're going to have our background image that we've downloaded basically occupy the entire splash screen, and then after 2 seconds it'll switch over to the home page of main storyboard and show me the same background image but with buttons in front of it. So that's the effect we want to give. So we'll start off with highlighting the yellow circle inside launch screen.storyboard, and let's configure this. I'm going to go with an iPhone 5. So I'm going to say size iPhone 4-inch. I'm going to say orientation landscape. So this will be a landscape app. So I now have my splash page ready to go. What I want to do is I want to put an image here. And I want my background image to basically encompass the entire page. So if I look to my little palette here, I'm going to type into the search box the word image. And when I do that, this little item called image view pops up. And if I drag image view, I can place it anywhere I want. I can center it, right? It'll be the size, the image will be the size of this image view object. I want to make it the size of the entire screen. So I'm going to move it here and expand it right to the size. Okay. So now I have this little image view object. The purpose now is to populate it with an image. So if I go to the attributes inspector here, I'll see my first option is image. In the drop-down, I can choose whichever image was imported into the project. And again, only images that were imported into the project will be visible here. So I'm going to choose home.jpg since that's my home page. So now the background image of the will appear here as my splash screen. I'll do a Command S to save. And we'll move over to main storyboard and we'll do the exact same thing again. So inside main storyboard, highlight the yellow circle, attributes inspector is highlighted, size, use iPhone 4-inch, orientation, landscape. I'm going to drag that same image view now onto the home page of the storyboard, of the main storyboard. There. And I'll, under image, under the attributes inspector, I'll choose my home page. Now, before we get further into images and actually configuring this page, let's talk about images for a second. So the background image, it's a JPEG file, which is great. We're taking advantage of the small file size capability of the JPEG file. But if I look at my buttons for a second here, my home, my about button, my games button, my settings button, these are all PNGs. And there's a reason that they're PNGs. So PNGs have a special capability, and GIF files also have the same capability, where it can provide transparent backgrounds. So you may have seen apps that have these beautiful buttons, right? And the whole page looks fantastic because you have all these different non-square buttons that you can click on, like these circles, triangles. In this case, I have signposts. And so these buttons are irregularly shaped, but really they're square objects. They're still square. It's just that the background is transparent, so you don't see that. So with buttons, it's recommended you go with PNGs or GIFs that have a transparent background, and it can be shaped any way you want. And so, but working with a graphics artist, they'll help you out with these sort of things when you're building proper apps out there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring in my buttons. And I'm going to have them be looking like signposts. So going back to main storyboard, I want to bring in some buttons. So I'm going to search for a button. And my first option here, button, comes up. And there's a few things to keep in mind with this button item. And I'm going to bring in 3, because I have 3 options here. And I can resize these buttons to be any size I want. Now, if I look at the attributes inspector for the button, I have my text here, the word button. I can change that to whatever I want. In our calculator app, we changed it to be digits and addition, subtraction, multiplication, and so on. But here, we're actually going to deal with actual images. So I have 2 things here. I have image and I have background. I'll start by choosing image, and we'll talk about the differences here. So if I choose image, I'm going to choose the game PNG icon. If I click on that, you'll notice that my button resized to be the size of the image, all right? Which is a bit annoying. I can still resize it down, but it's not as fun to work with. And also the text is here, the button text. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to undo this, go back to what I have, and it's better to go with background. So if I choose, instead of image, I choose background, I choose games. It fits the image inside the box that I have created already. So it saves me the headache of having to resize the image. I'm going to get rid of the word button here because I want my button to be based on the graphic. So the customized, the nice looking text here. And I can still resize it down to whatever size I want. So I think I'll take that size, be good. And I'll move it around where I need to. So now, because the PNG with a clear background, it looks like it blends right in. Like the signpost looks like it's part of the grass, right? So I'm going to do the same thing with the other 2. So I'm going to go straight to background. I'm going to choose settings for this one. It's set it to that size, and I'll fix that in a sec. I'll get rid of the word button. And for the last one, I'll choose about. Get rid of the word button. So I have 2 more buttons. I need to resize them, and I could resize them like this, but just to match up with the size of this button to be consistent, let's highlight this and switch over to the size inspector. It tells me this is 112 by 60. So if I click on the settings button, I can change this to 112 by 60. There, and then move it around where I want. And 112 by 60 again. Okay, so now I have my home page with 3 buttons, and they look like they meld in nicely. So we have our home page configured, and in fact, if we give this a run, choosing iPhone 5s, let's see how the app reacts. Okay, so there's our splash page, and we now see our home page with the 3 buttons. Did a bit of a weird jump there, but in the end, it still shows our buttons. Okay, so at this point, we just have the home page and we have the splash page, right? So we have 2 pages now. So I'm going to stop this. And now we're going to add other pages to our storyboard. So you can actually move it around using 2-finger swiping on your trackpad to get a good location. But what we want to do is we want to add a few more pages here. And it's really easy to do. So I'm going to clear up my search bar, come back to the original look I had for my list of palette items here. And my first option here is View Controller. And so this is the item I need for adding a new page onto the storyboard. So I'm going to take a View Controller, drag it, let it resize and blow up to a large size, and then I'm going to highlight View Controller, the yellow circle, go to the fourth option, the Attributes Inspector, size it up to 4-inch, orientation will be landscape, and then I can just drag it into a place that's reasonable and use its guide bars. So I'll do it again 2 more times because we need 2 more pages anyway. So take View Controller, drag it anywhere, let it resize, and then making sure the yellow circle is highlighted, choose my size, iPhone 4-inch, landscape orientation, and then place it somewhere reasonable in the storyboard. And do it one more time. So take View Controller, drag it, let it blow up in size. If it goes back here, then you gotta do it again. So go to View Controller, size is, in my case, 4-inch, orientation, landscape, and then just drag it someplace. So now my storyboard has 4 pages. Has 4 pages. It's not done yet. We're not done configuring these pages though. Here's the thing. We have here 4 objects. We have View Controller, we have Game View Controller, Settings View Controller, and About View Controller. And by default, when you generate the project, it generated the one home page, and it generated a View Controller object, and it automatically linked them together. We don't have to do any configuration. But because we're dragging in 3 other pages, we have to do configuration for this. Small configuration, but still configuration. So I'm going to start down here with this one, making sure the yellow circle is highlighted, and go back to my inspectors here. And next to the Attributes Inspector is the Identity Inspector. So it's my 3rd inspector here. If I click on this, my first option in the list is Class. And grayed out is UI View Controller because that's the parent object. In the drop-down, I'm going to look for the Game View Controller. So I'm going to start typing Game, and it'll autocomplete Game View Controller. And so now I've connected this class, GameViewController.hnm, to this screen. So anytime I create a variable like an IB outlet or an IB action, like an event handler, and I go to my outlets, I will see them, but only for whatever I defined inside the GameViewController class. I'll do the same thing 2 more times so you can see it again. So I'm going to go up here to this one, highlight yellow circle, making sure that my identity inspector is highlighted. Class will be, this one will be Settings View Controller. So just start typing the word Settings. And so Settings View Controller is there. I'll just hit Tab to tab away, and it's there. So this will be Settings View Controller. I'll do it one more time for this third one, the 4th one here. View Controller, highlighting it. View Controller's yellow circle is highlighted. Under Class, I'm going to say About View Controller, tab it. So now About View Controller.hnm is connected to this screen. Settings View Controller H&M is connected to this screen. Now if I look around the storyboard here, so if I click away here, this gives me the title, Settings View Controller. If I click here, this gives you the title, About View Controller. And over here, Game View Controller. And this is just View Controller. So all the names match up. So this is another test to tell you, have I properly configured each of the screens? Because if they just say View Controller, then you got to ask yourself, did I really configure that screen I just brought in? So now everything's configured. What we can do now is start working on the actual pages. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with Game View Controller. And if you notice, in the demo we had at the beginning of this, we had a bar at the top of each page. A bar that told us where we were in the app. That's called a navigation bar. So we're going to bring one in here. So I'm going to type in nav into the search bar. And my second option here, navigation bar, comes up. And so if I drag in navigation bar, let it expand, let it center with the guide bars, and let it go. And I can change the color to anything I want for this. But I'm going to double click on the title and call this game. So this is my navigation bar. And this always goes at the top of the screen. It never goes at the bottom, it never goes in the middle. It always goes to the top of the screen. And this is part of Apple's user interface design guidelines. If you try putting it out of place, they'll reject your app. If you accidentally have it like a few pixels down, they'll reject your app. So, because you're violating their design guidelines. And you'll notice that Android follows suit with the way it looks. You'll see bars at the top of your apps as well, right? Because it's just the way people are accustomed to seeing these apps. If you want, you can configure it. Maybe change the color. So, bar tint might be blue, or maybe you want to go with something a bit more classier like gray. But you can change the background color of the bar. You can change the color of the font. Right? There's a lot you can do with it. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to add a back button. And this bar has the capability of adding a button, one on each side. So I'm going to have a button here and have a button here. That's about all it can support. And typically what you do is if you have a button here, it's typically like a submit button or something to go to another page. If you have something here, it's typically your back button that typically goes here for iPhone. Right? In the Android world, you typically have your back button on the phone already, so you don't typically do this. But here in the iPhone world, there's no back button, so you're expected to put a back button here up in the corner. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to search for another button, and underneath it, bar button item comes up. So this bar button item is designed specifically for the bar. And notice that the guide bars are, oops. So I'm going to drag bar button item. And notice that the guide bar circle appeared to help me with the placement. So I have this word item here. If I double click on the word item, I can change it to be any text I want. I'm just going to put the word back. So now I have a bar with a back button, but the back button doesn't work yet. And now I have to configure the back button. Before I can do that, I have to do a little bit of extra legwork here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to configure connecting buttons together. And what we're going to do is we're going to look back at the home page and create a connection that goes from the button to the views, the different views we have. What this transition is, it's called a segue, S-E-G-U-E, segue. So we basically create a segue to segue from page 1 to page 2. So what we're going to do is back on the home page, we're going to click on a button, for example, and we want to connect it to a page. But it's actually easier if we use the document outline. So this little button here in the bottom corner, if I click on this little button here in the bottom corner, if I click on this, I'll see everything listed here that I have dragged onto the storyboard. It's a really convenient little outline. And you'll notice that I have my view controller, which is my home page. I have my buttons here. I also have settings view controller, I have about view controller, and I have game view controller. And so if I click on any one of these, it'll jump directly to that particular item. Now, I want to connect a button to a particular page. So I want to create a segue to that. And also, before I do that, let's look at the order here. So this home.jpg, this is saying that this is at the back. Things are on top of each other. So this is at the back. This button is on top of the home. This button is on top of both. And this button is on top of everything. So in terms of layers. Now, if you ever find that you have a button missing, but it's listed here in your outline, double check that you have your back page all the way at the back. If you have anything behind the back page, it's basically going to cover it up. So if I take a button, for example, I move it. Now the button's disappeared, but it's there. but it's underneath the background image, so you can't even access it. So you have to be very careful about the order of things. So I'll undo that. Now getting back to this, let's connect this game button to the game page. So you're going to hold down the control button on your keyboard, the control button, not the command button, but the control button. If I hold that down and I left click on that button and I start dragging, I can drag it. I'm going to drag it to the game view controller. And I'm going to let go. And I choose present modally. And if I look back here, it has now created a little bit of a line to join these pages together. We're going to do this 2 more times because we have 2 more buttons to do this for. So I'm going to pick on the settings button, and I want to join this to the settings page. So I'm going to hold down the control button, left click, and drag to the settings view controller, let go, and say present modally. Do it 1 more time. Hold down the control button, left click, drag to the about view controller, and say present modally. So for the last button, hold down control, left click, drag to the about, say present modally. And so all the buttons now are connected. But we want to click on the back button and connect this and do the reverse of this. So let's just talk about what happened here first before we go into that, because there's a bit of a there's something different that we have to do here. So what we just did was we created these segues, and they're listed here under the view controller, the home page here. A segue is a transition from one page to another. So what happens here is that it's going to instantiate and allocate memory for the new page, and then it'll put that new page on the screen. That's really what's going on. We can customize this by adding a style to how we transition. And we'll talk about that in a second. Now, if we want to go back from the game page back to the home page, we have to do something a bit different here. Because what will happen is that I could just do the same method I did for connecting a segue, but it's going to instantiate and allocate memory for the home page. But this was already in memory. So that's a problem. So if I keep doing segue, 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 it's just going to keep allocating memory and filling up memory on my phone and eventually cripple my phone and crash the app. We don't want to do that. When we're done with a page, we want to reverse back in time and gracefully go back to the home page and free up any memory that was allocated for this page. So we want to unwind to this page. Okay? And the way we do it is we have to write a special method in code before we can go ahead and do that, the connection we're about to do. So if I go to viewcontroller.m for a second, I'm going to create a special event handler here inside viewcontroller.m. The reason I'm doing it inside viewcontroller.m is because I'm going to go back to this page. So any page I want to go back to or I want to unwind to, I'll create this special method inside the M file for that particular page. So I'm going to say IB action. Now we'll give it a name. We'll say unwind to this view controller. I know it's a bit long, but it's descriptive. We'll do our opening and closing curly, but this isn't enough for this method declaration. So we're saying unwind to this view controller. It's an IB action, but we have to do something special with this event handler. The argument is ID sender. We have to change this. This will get changed to UI Storyboard segue star. So this is a special method. This is a special event handler. Its argument is UI Storyboard segue. Its purpose is to appear in a special place that'll allow us to connect an exit button or a back button in a proper way that we want it to be connected, right? So we want to be able to unwind to the previous page. Now we can put anything we want in here. We can leave this empty. Leaving this empty is perfectly fine for this action that we're going to do right now. There may be cases where maybe you're playing background music on one page and you have different background music for another page. So you might want to stop that music while you're going back in time to the home page, and you can do that. You can just turn off your music right here in this method. right? And then maybe load some new music inside view did load, right? So there's a lot of options available at your disposal for configuring. And so at this point, we're done with this method. We're going to do Command S to save this. We're going to jump back to main storyboard. And now we're going to connect the back button in such a way that it'll unwind to the home page. Now, what we're going to do here is look at our options up here. We've been using the yellow circle all along, but on the other end, there's an icon, and if I mouse over, it says exit. This is what I want to connect to. So, all right, left click and let go. We'll see our unwind to this view controller method pops up, and we want to click on that. We want to select this. I want to select this method. Now, our exit button is connected. And we have enough to try out for our app here. So I'm going to hit the play button, let this run. Okay, so there's our splash page. So there's our splash page. There's our home page. And if I click on games, it goes to my game page. Hit the back button, goes back to the home page, right? But if I hit settings, nothing. And I can't do anything. I can't do it. I'm stuck. All right? Yeah. For settings, yes. For settings and about, yes. Because we haven't done anything with those pages. So that's why. So it's okay. Yeah. We only did game page. So we only did game page. So that's why game page should have the back button. It's great. We got to do the same thing for the other two pages now. Okay. So let's finish off the game page now. In the game page, we're going to add a few labels and a segmented controller. So looking at our tools here, I'm going to hide this for real estate reasons. And I'm going to start by bringing up something called a segmented control. So if I start by typing the word segment into my search bar, I can drag the segmented control here. Now this is like a nice little utility for having multiple options or choosing one option out of multiple options. And by default, it comes up with first and second. It's a 2-button thing. And if I look at the properties of it, I have by default 2 segments here. If I hit the up arrow, I'll have 3, and I can resize it by stretching it. So now I want to change this from first, second, and blank to easy, medium, and hard. So if I look here under segments, I can choose on the drop down any one of these segments here. So I'm going to choose first. Underneath it is title. I'm going to change this to easy. And under segment 1, I'm going to choose medium. Under segment 2, where it's blank, I'm going to put the word hard. So I'll have easy, medium, and hard. And then I want to drag some labels. So I'm going to search for labels. Let's see here. This one will be difficulty. So center, justify it, put the word difficulty here. Below it will be level. Below that will be score. And below that, time left. So we have easy, medium, and hard, difficulty level, and time left. Now we're done with, we'll do Command S to save this storyboard, and we're done with the storyboard for now. The trick now is to actually go into code and support this page. So we're going to support this page by going to gameViewController.h. And let's start by defining the variables we need to define here. So we want to have variables for each of the items on that page. So opening, closing curly, I'm going to say IB outlet. I'm going to start with the segmented control. We're going to say UI segmented control. I call this one SGDiff for difficulty. And then we need labels. So we're going to say IB outlet, UI label, and we're going to say LB diff for difficulty again, IB outlet, UI label, LB level, IB outlet, UI label, LB score, and finally IB outlet, UI label, LB time. And so that'll declare the variables inside my class. But we need to do property declarations. And so the easiest thing to do is to copy and paste below and then add the word property before it. So I'm going to highlight all my variables here. Command C to copy, Command V to paste, and type in the word property behind it. So I'm going to say at property, we're going to use non-atomic and strong. And I'll just copy this piece of the line again and just put it in front of the other IB outlets. And that's my header file. So do Command S to save. Okay, so now we're going to switch over to gameViewController.m. And let's synthesize all those variables. So we say at synthesize, LB diff, LB time, LB score, LB level, and SG diff. And let's start by defaulting some of these values here. So we'll go inside ViewDidLoad, and we're going to pre-populate some values here. So we're going to start off with LB level, set text, say we're on level 5. LB score, set text, and we'll say score. Let's make ourselves feel special by saying 365,321. And also LB time, set text. We'll say time 54 seconds left. Now, the last thing is the difficulty label. We want to tie in the difficulty label to the difficulty segmented control. So we want to set up an event handler that'll link in, and every time we click on something, it'll update that label. So we want to do a couple of things here. We also want to actually update the text with whatever is there upon load time as well. So with ViewDidLoad here. So we can do a couple of things here. First thing we're going to do is create a method to update the value of the label. So I'm going to say void return type and call it update label, update difficulty. And we're going to go in and actually do something with this in a moment. But let's just call it here for now. So self update difficulty. And also, we're going to create an event handler at the same time so that every time we click on something inside in the difficulty segment control, it automatically executes this update difficulty. So we're going to say IB action. We're going to say segment did change. And inside of it, we're also going to call update difficulty. So self and that just leaves us with the need to fill out this code for update difficulty. So here's the thing about the segmented control. It has each segment is labeled from 0 to n-1 with a value. So we want to get the value of the currently selected segment. So we're going to say NSInteger diff is equal to sgdiff dot selected segment index. That'll tell us which segment from 0 to n-1 was selected. Then we can go ahead and put in an if statement. So we'll say if diff is equal to 0, then we'll update the text. So lb difficulty or diff set text, we'll say difficulty easy. We'll say else if diff equals 1, lb diff set text difficulty medium. Else lb diff set text difficulty hard. So at this point, from a coding perspective, we're done with this page. The last step here is to link everything together on the storyboard. And then we can go ahead and give it a run, and it should work. So we'll save our M file, Command S, switch over to main storyboard, and let's do our connections here. We'll start by highlighting the yellow circle, going to the connections inspector, and we'll see all our labels. So lb diff, go ahead and connect that. To the difficulty. lb level to the level. Score to score. And time to time left. sgdiff gets connected to the segmented control. And there's one last thing. So we connected sgdiff to the segmented control, which is great, but we created an event handler down here at the bottom called segment did change under the received actions category. So we created this event handler right now. We want to connect this to the segmented control. So we need to connect this, and we'll see our list of options come up. Now with the button, we chose touch up inside for the button, right? But for the segmented control, things are a bit different. We're not doing a touch up inside. We want to do a value changed. So for this case, we want to do a value changed because it's a changing value. We're not caring about whether the thing was touched. We care about whether something was modified on this widget here. So we're going to say value changed. And that's it. Command S to save. Give it a run. There's our splash page. Here's our home page. If I click on games, we see here level 5, score, time left. Click on medium, hard. So every time you click on a segment, the text will change. Hit back. That's our back button. All right, so at this point, we're going to pause this for now. And in the next part, we're going to continue on with finishing off the other two pages. In the other two pages, we're going to have a web view to navigate to and load a web page. And we'll play around with the slider and do the exact same thing here, but with a slider this time around. So we'll continue that in the next time we meet.